I've been dying to talk
Thank
to you
you.
because all you've been hearing from Democrats and certainly Republicans this whole race is Joe Biden is too old, he's out of it. You were with him not constantly, but you were with him an awful lot. So, what do you say to people that say that about the president?
I haven't worked for him for a year and a half, but I worked for him very closely for a year and a half before that. And he is somebody who would go from talking to a foreign leader to calling Mitch McConnell to negotiating a deal on the Hill to trying to get, money for the war in Ukraine, and talking to leaders overseas. That was not my experience with him. He is 81 years old. That is a fact. And there's no question that my former colleagues and obviously the campaign need to grapple with the reality that that is a concern for many voters, and they're fully aware of that. But my experience when I worked for him was that he was certainly somebody who was, not only prepared to be president, but also a person who, of course, could take on the job every day. He was doing it when I worked for him.
Jen Psaki, when you worked for him, obviously it was not as a candidate, it was as president of the United States, but communication of his policies and how he responded to the world around him was part of your job. I have to say, as someone, I know I speak for Marjorie, who regularly praise many of the accomplishments of the current president over the last couple of years, despite the opposition, not only from the Republicans, but from some in his own party. I frankly think they've done a rotten job of communicating to the public the things they've done. I mean, before we got here, Pete Buttigieg was here talking about all the infrastructure stuff and the bridges they're going to be built. But I can't tell you how many people call the show who are smart people, who are not all trumped up, who are shocked when we tell them that X has happened or Y has happened. Do you share that concern?
Yeah, but I think there are some reasons for it that it's important to acknowledge. I mean, one is that his likely opponent, even as we have the New Hampshire primary coming up tomorrow, it basically blocks out the sun of most media coverage because of his legal challenges, because of the court cases, because of the crazy things he says. It's quite hard to break through in this environment. So that is one big challenge. The second challenge is that people in the country, they vote, they decide what they're going to support based on how people make them feel, not based on data. Nobody votes on or supports people because of a fact sheet or because of economic data. And right now, the contrast is not completely clear, in part because there's a surprising swath of the public that still thinks that Trump might not be the nominee. And in part because people are still feeling personal pain from the economy. You can't tell people how you feel. So those are some of the challenges I think that they deal with. And I think they're important to acknowledge. It's not just like they do a rotten job. It's hard to get covered right now. It's hard to break through right now, given who's taking up a lot of the oxygen.
We were talking before today about how Donald Trump is running as an incumbent, and but he doesn't have to be the guy that's running and the guy that's running the country at the same time. Joe Biden has to do both. So I'm wondering, you're a very experienced person in being a press secretary. How do you, to get back to my first question, how do you advise, or would you advise, the people that are doing it now to get Joe Biden out there enough so people get over this hump about his age, which seems to be like the biggest issue.
Yeah. Look, I think, believe it or not, there's still a lot of time between now and the election. And what the best thing that could possibly happen to the Biden campaign is for it to become clear sooner rather than later that Trump is going to be the nominee. And that might be this week. We will see. But for them, they need the contrast is what it's going to help them break through and help them talk about not just accomplishments. I wouldn't put it in that category. I put it in the who am I fighting for? Because that's what people really care about. It's less like, the GDP is X. Like that doesn't impact people's everyday life. They want to know and understand who's fighting for healthcare access, who's fighting for lower costs of prescription drugs, et cetera. Those are all things the Biden team talks about. But until it's in the scope of a contrast, it's challenging to do. The age issue is more about having him out there fighting exactly that fight, everybody kind of saw him do that a little bit with the two democracy speeches a couple of weeks ago. I think the question is how quickly out of the gate can they be to continue to do more of those in other areas of direct contrast to remind people what the choice is about in November.
We're talking to Jen Psaki from MSNBC. She's got a book coming out on May 7th, obviously former press secretary to the President of the United States. I want to ask you about the comments of somebody you're close to who described Trump's attitude towards women as creepy, sexualized, and demeaning. That would be you.
I know who that is.
Morning, Mika. And, you know, I have to say, I don't know who you're talking to, maybe Adam Kinzinger a couple of minutes ago, that Mitt Romney hit the nail on the head, having not only the courage to criticize Trump for his creepy, sexualized, demeaning behavior towards women, but basically criticized voters, which politicians never do, and said, how can people not be appalled, I'm paraphrasing, by the fact that this guy is found to have sexually abused E. Jean Carroll. And by the way, under Massachusetts statute, where we ordinarily operate, the sexual abuse under New York law would be rape under Massachusetts law. So he essentially raped a woman. And Romney's right. Is it cost him one damn vote, particularly among women in this country, Jen Psaki?
We don't know the answer to that yet, right? I mean, here's a reality, because I like to be an optimist. I do think what he said is creepy, sexualized, all the things you said. I said that, and I also applaud Mitt Romney for being as honest and forthright as he has been. I would say that what's important to remember for the optimists out there is that the Republican electorate, who Trump is appealing to right now, is focused on appealing to, in order to lock in the nomination, is different from the general election electorate, which is often underestimated in terms of kind of what you're paying attention, what they're paying attention to, and what they care about. You know, I remember leading up to 2022, there was this fear that there would be among Democrats, I should say, that there would be a red wave, that nobody would care about the preservation of democracy, that all these candidates who were big lie supporters would be elected. That's not what happened, because the general election electorate is different. Now, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that contrast is drawn and it is clear. But women, whether or not it's about the comments, hard to predict. I mean, Trump won white women, so there we are as a white woman. I can't explain that. But like, there's also abortion access. There's also fundamental rights like that I think are going to be a huge driver, all kind of wrapped into one. And it may be hard to differentiate which things are the ones that are pushing people across the finish line.
You know, I would never in a million years compare Kamala Harris to to Sarah Palin, two totally different people. And there's a lot of racism and sexism involved with Kamala Harris as well, too, as the first woman of color to be vice president. But I think frankly, it's a problem, because a lot of people are worried about Joe Biden being older, and the vice president has not really caught on with a lot of the public. What do you do about that?
Well, when you say not caught on, I think she hasn't caught on with kind of elites in some ways. But actually, if you look at what she does when she goes out into the country and talks about abortion rights, when she goes to college campuses, she has quite a bit of support. There's an element of, and the way I often hear this when there's the attack of, and Nikki Haley actually does this. I went to her event the other day. She's a good speaker, I would say, first of all, at events, good debater. But she does this thing about Kamala Harris at her events where she says, let's be honest, Joe Biden isn't worth it, or isn't up to it. Translation, he's old. We could get Kamala Harris, right? Which is like a little bit, he's old, he may die. And look at her, she's a black woman. We can't elect a black woman to this country. We got to kind of call it what it is here. She's obviously very smart. Look at her background. We've seen her debate. We've seen her speak publicly. She's been out there in the country. I think some of the dialogues at dinner parties is a little behind what she's actually doing. But I would say if I were advising them, I would have her just spend the next 10 months on college campuses, out there talking about abortion rights, a lot of the issues that she cares very deeply and passionately about and is authentically making arguments on behalf of.
You know, you say you're an optimist. You can't hold a candle to Nikki Haley. There's never racism in this country. How much more optimistic can you get? Let me tell you, Jen Psaki. You know, you mentioned democracy.
Well, unless you reread her 2015 speech. Yeah. I recently reread her 2015 speech, which was quite good on taking the flag down. And it's like a different person. So
I can't believe I did the exact same thing this morning. You were totally right. Your former boss on January 5th, I think because of weather, on the eve of the January 6th anniversary, said Trump's assault on democracy isn't just part of his past, it's what he's promising for the future. The Suffolk poll a week or so ago, January 9th, I think, had the number one issue, even though we're not quite sure what they mean, of voters in New Hampshire about the future of democracy. That's my number one issue. Does that sell, do you think, to the American people?
It's not the only thing that sells, but I think we underestimate how much it sells. And I count myself among this. I mean, it's an issue that's deeply important to me as well. And, you know, I take that in part from my time when I was at the State Department, and we were, you know, actually speaking about authoritarian regimes and governments around the world. We don't want to become that here, believe me. But I think that's a good example. That's an issue where, say, leading up to 2022, there was a debate within the Democratic Party, which I think was an interesting one, right? Should you be talking about democracy? Should you be talking about the economy? Should you talk about abortion rights? The answer is kind of all of them, but democracy is an issue that people cared about, that people wanted to defend, that they wanted to stand up for, was underestimated. Just remember the fact that the big lie candidates really didn't end up getting elected, which tells you a lot as well. So I think it's important not to underestimate the power of that argument.
So we're going to be spending my birthday, the three of us, talking about your book. Is that correct, Jen Psaki?
Absolutely.
I'll look forward to it. I'll look forward to it.
We really appreciate your time, Jen. Thanks so much.
Thank you both for your time. Pleasure speaking with you.
You as well.
Thank you. We've been speaking with Jen
Thank
Psaki,
you.
White House press secretary for Joe Biden until 2022. She's now the host of Inside with Jen Psaki. You can see it Sundays at noon Eastern Time and Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on MSNBC.